All right, Algebra 1B students, welcome to part 1 of lesson 9.4. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring. We looked at factoring a lot back in chapter 8, where we were looking at quadratic equations and factoring them into two expressions in parentheses that were being multiplied together. And in chapter 9 so far, we've been talking a little bit more about quadratic equations and what a solution of one might look like on a graph and things like that. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to solve by factoring an equation, right? When we want to solve a quadratic equation by factoring especially, there are two very crucial conditions that we have to meet, right? We have to meet these two conditions. The first is that the quadratic expression must equal 0. Okay? Quadratic expression must be equal to 0. If it doesn't equal 0, you'll have to do some algebra in order to get it to equal 0. Okay? The other thing is that the quadratic expression must be in standard form. Okay? Standard form, remember, means that x squared comes first, then the x, then the number. All right? In that order, it has to go x squared, x, and then the number. That's standard form of a quadratic equation. So just as a quick example, this would be an example that's good. This is one that would work. All right? 3x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0 because it's x squared, then x, then a number, and it's equal to 0. This one over here is bad for two reasons. One, it's equal to 8, which is not allowed. And two, it has x squared here in the middle instead of having it first, and so these things are out of order. So make sure that when you solve a quadratic equation by factoring, you have it in standard form, x squared, then x, then the number, and it must equal 0 like this one is, okay? Now, just as a reminder on the factoring, if we want to factor a quadratic equation, as long as there is not a number in front of the x squared right here, we can simply ask ourselves two questions, or one question really, to find two numbers. I need numbers in this case that multiplied together will give me negative 32 and added together will give me a positive 4. All right? So if I want numbers that will multiply together to give me 32, the first ones I think of are 8 and 4. If I make the 8 be a plus, and I make the 4 be a minus, 8 plus a negative 4 will give me 4, right? 8 plus negative 4 is 4. So that would be my factored form of this quadratic equation. This right here would be my factored form of the quadratic equation. What we're asked to do in this section is to take this factored form and use it to find our two solutions for that quadratic equation. Right? There will always be two solutions for the ones that we're doing in this section. In order to do that, we use something that's called the zero product property. Right? Here's what that says. If you have two things multiplied together that equals 0, like a times b, whatever those are, equals 0, then either the first piece has to be 0 or the second piece has to be 0. All right? So in quadratic expression form, if I've already factored my quadratic equation into x plus 3, x plus 2, and I know that those are equal to 0 because remember, when we're solving, we have to have it equal to 0, then I have two options. Either this first factor, x plus 3, can equal 0, or the second factor, x plus 2, could equal 0. Now, from each of those, we should be able to figure out what x equals, right? To get x by itself in this equation, I minus 3 on both sides. And I get x equals negative 3. 0 take away 3 is negative 3. And then the other one, if I minus 2 on both sides, I get that x is equal to negative 2. And those would be my two solutions, numbers for x that will make the equation true. right? So once you have the quadratic equation factored, we use the zero product property to write two separate equations that we can solve quite easily. All right? So if, for example, we have this factored form here, 4t plus 1 times t minus 2, remember it's still equal to 0 because that's what's necessary for this property to work. We can do 4t plus 1 equals 0, and then we can also do t minus 2 equals 0. All right, and from each of those we can find a solution. If we solve this one by minusing 1 and then divide by 4, we get that t is equal to negative 1/4. And on this side, if we add 2 on both sides, we get that t is equal to negative 2. And those would be my two solutions, that one and this one. Okay? So what we're going to end up doing is something like this, where I need to take a quadratic expression, factor it first. Step 1, factor. And then I'll solve using the zero product property. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to factor this quadratic equation. Again, notice there's no number multiplied in front of the x squared, so I can just ask myself, what two numbers multiply to be 15 and add up to be 8? Well, two numbers that multiply to be 15 would be 3 and 5, and 3 plus 5 does equal 8, so I can factor this into parentheses x plus 3 and parentheses x plus 5. Okay, now remember, this equation, or this left side, is still equal to 0 on the right. And now that I have two things multiplied together, these two parenthesis pieces, that equal 0, I can use the zero product property to solve. So step 2 is going to be to write two equations and solve. So my first equation will say x plus 3 equals 0, and my second equation will say x plus 5 equals 0. Each of these equations is one that we should be able to solve quite easily. On the left side, we have to minus 3 on both sides to get the x by itself. We get x equals negative 3. And then on the right side, if we minus 5 on both sides, get rid of that, we get x equals negative 5. So my two answers would be negative 3 and negative 5. That would be choice A. Okay? These are my two solutions. I've got a couple here for you to try. Don't worry about letter B, but let's just do letter A. Try to solve this quadratic equation first by factoring it, then use zero product property, write your two equations, and solve. And then when you have your answers, come on back and I'll show you what we should have. So pause the video, try letter A, finding me the two solutions with my 2 steps from above, then come on back and I'll show you what we should get. When we factor this equation, we should end up with m minus 7 and m plus 2 equal to 0. And then my zero product property would say m minus 7 equals 0, or m plus 2 equals 0. And from those, I get my two answers, m equals positive 7, and m equals a negative 2. If you have any questions, about factoring and then using zero product property to find our two solutions, please make a note to ask me in class tomorrow. Otherwise, that's all I have for you. Have a wonderful night.